A start. Good evening, everybody, and welcome all committee members, members of the public and press, and those viewing on the live stream to the meeting. All the councillors, do you have access to the agenda before the meeting starts? Thank you. In the event of fire, we have access on both sides, so if you hear a fire alarm, we can just make way out of that. And first of all, can I ask the committee members, would you please introduce yourselves? Councillor Burbage, from you.
Councillor Chris Burbage for the Bretton Wood.
Councillor Nicole Moyo from Highgate and Hempstead Ward.
Councillor Graham Casey, Orton Longville Ward.
Councillor Richard Brown, Ithorny Newborough Wards.
Councillor Lindsay Sharp, Hampton Vale Ward.
Parish Councillor Michael Samways, co-opted member of the committee.
Councillor John Fox, Warrington Ward.
Yes, I'm Councillor Nick Sanford, Paston Walton Ward. I'm not actually a member of the committee, but I'm here in my capacity as leader of the Liberal Democrat group.
Councillor Chris Wiggin, Hampton Vale Ward.
Councillor Arcia Joseph, Park Ward.
Councillor Heather Skipstead from Orton Longville Ward.
Councillor Judy Fox from Warrington Ward.
Councillor Nicola Day, Orton Waterville Ward.
Thank you, councillors. Do we have any apologies?
Thank you, Chair. We have no apologies for this meeting.
Members, do we have any declarations of interest or whipping declarations? No declarations. We're now moving to item 3 on the agenda, which is exclusion of the press and public. Appendix A of agenda item 4, Save Bretton Oak Tree petition, action to be taken, is exempt. The exemption is based on the grounds that it contains sensitive information under paragraph 1 of part 1 of schedule 12A to the Local Government Act 1972, information relating to any individual, paragraph 3 of part 1 of schedule 12A to the Local Government Act 1972, information relating to the financial or business affairs of any particular person, including the authority holding that information. The public interest test has been applied to the information contained within the exempt appendix, and it is considered that need to retain the information as exempt outweighs the public interest in disclosing it. Appendix A is exempt as it relates to data provided to the Council as part of an ongoing insurance claim, and therefore the Council is only able to use that data for the purposes of dealing with the claim and cannot make it public. In addition, the report provides advice on the Council's liability and therefore also has litigation privilege. Our members all agreed that the committee should go into exempt session and exclude the press and public and pause the live streaming of the meeting of this document is to be discussed. Do we all agree to it? Councillor Sanford?
Yeah, I suspect you probably don't have any choice, but I do have severe concerns about this entire report being declared exempt, because there may well be some confidential information in it, but there's also information in it that is highly pertinent to the actual issue. So my personal view would be that the public interest outweighs the exemption, but ultimately that is something that the committee will have to determine.
All committee members, do you agree that we should keep it exempt? Lindsay?
Thank you, Chair. My personal view is that, given that we've taken its legal advice from the Council, I think it's the right approach that we take the exemption. There are, taking Councillor Sanford's point on board, there are some references in there that are also picked up in the main body of the report, so we can still use those in terms of questioning of relevant individuals.
Thank you, Councillor Sharp, and I'll just reconfirm this one through our legal officer.
Thank you, Chair. Just
to let the committee know that we had confirmation from the Information Commissioner just this morning on an EIR request that was made in relation to this report and whether or not we should be disclosing it, and the ICO concluded that we were right to withhold the requested information.
Thank you. Okay. In that case, we will now move on to item 4 on the agenda, Save Bretton Oak Tree Petition. Action to be taken, page 3 to 62 of the agenda pack. I would like to welcome the following public speakers who are in attendance this evening. Mr. Hopkins, Mr. Jonathan Harpham, Lady Colette Francis, Mr. and Mrs. Benton, and Mr. Richard Alma. Officers who are also in attendance are Richard Kay, Head of Sustainable Growth Strategy, Darren Sharp, Natural and Historic Environment Manager, Sue Addison, Insurance Manager, and Paul Harris, Chartered Engineer, who is attending via Teams. The running order for this meeting will be as follows. The petitioner, Mr. Elmore actually will speak on behalf of Mr. Hopkins, will give an introduction to his petition. I will then invite any other speakers supporting the petition one at a time to speak, and then I will invite any speakers speaking against the petition one at a time to speak. Once all public speakers are finished, I will then ask officers to introduce the report. The committee will then have an opportunity to ask questions of those present and discuss the information that has been presented to them. The committee will then decide upon a recommendation to Cabinet. There will be no time limit on speakers. Please, can I invite the petitioner, Mr. Elmer, on behalf of Mr. Hopkins, to come to the presenters table and address the committee. Thank you. You may take the mask off as well, for clarity of speaking. Thank you.
Okay. Firstly, I'd like to thank the Chair for the opportunity to present this case. Some of my comments may be interpreted as criticism of the Council or question the competence of their employees. I would like to state that I have every respect for all concerned and their opinions. From the report commissioned by PII Insurance, the Council officers came to the conclusion that the defects in the building or buildings were subsidence caused by the demand for water from the clay soil by the oak tree. Our expert is of the opinion that the defects are actually caused by heave, which is due to the soil being saturated. So removal of this tree could in fact make the problem worse. We have lost 5 trees in Blind Lane in the last decade. In fact, the removal of the other veteran tree near to this last remaining tree has probably compounded the problem that is now being experienced. I will leave it to Jonathan Harpham to explain this fully, but as I understand it, the datum figures recorded on 9 Barnard Way are all positive, indicating heave, not subsidence, which would be indicated by negative readings. As we see it, the Council want to remove this tree to negate their liability, but in the case of heave, the Council are not liable. I wish the Council would put as much effort into preserving this tree as they have put into trying to convince us that removal is the best option. The tree was seen as an asset in the past, and yet in these environmentally challenging times, members or employees of this Council have described it as a nuisance. In the Council's latest report, they state that the tree could affect buildings of up to 30 metres from it. If this statement is true, why does the original planning permission for these houses stipulate that they should be no closer than 14 metres? Why does the council continue to ignore and look past the original planning condition that stated no buildings were to be built or erected on the back of number 9 or number 10? This stipulation was obviously there for a reason. So why is it being ignored now? The trees were considered important enough to protect them 20 years ago, but seemingly not now. Sorry, I've lost my place. But seemingly not now. Clearly, neither the canopy or the roots have grown significantly since planning permission was granted. Has the council actually discussed the alternatives with the insurance company or companies to see if a conclusion can be reached for everyone's benefit and satisfaction? Will the house or houses require underpinning regardless of the outcome? If yes, then why should the tree be lost? If the council are liable for anything, it is a mistake by the planning department to allow buildings to be erected. If this is deemed to be the case, the council surely can claim from their professional indemnity insurance to provide funds for repairs, or in the event that they self-insure, then they have available a pot of taxpayers' money to the tune of £6 million for such an event. Paul Bristow has stated in the media more than once that no stone should be left unturned in the effort to save this much-loved veteran tree. To date, from what we've seen, the council officers have not tried to save this tree. They have put a large effort into trying to find a way to remove it, depriving residents and future generations of this magnificent tree. The people making these decisions are not the people that live in the area, and thereby will not be affected by its loss. Council officers have described this as a nuisance. The tree is not a nuisance, and it is now under threat because of inadequate building foundations and the risk-adverse attitude of the council lawyers. The trees were granted a TPO for good reasons, and these reasons still exist. The council are responsible for the tree on behalf of the people the council provides services for. In effect, the trees belong to the people of Peterborough, both the current generations and generations to come. One of our members has been in contact with Lawyers for Nature, and they are currently looking into this case and may issue a letter before action if this is seen to be necessary. I ask the council to refer this to a planning scrutiny committee and to find a way to preserve this valuable tree, either working with the insurance companies concerned, or if the council feel that they are not responsible for planning errors, then they must defend this claim, as in the event of heave they cannot be held responsible. In that case, the insurance companies should pay to repair the property or properties that they have received premiums for. As I understand it, once underpinned, the moisture content of the soil will have no further effect on the building or buildings, and it will enable the tree to remain and the homeowner to have a house that is insurable and will retain its full market value. The council have a real chance here to redeem themselves because public opinion has not been great, and I do urge the council to listen to what is being said. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Elmer. Can I please now invite Jonathan Harpham, please come to the presenters table.
All right, before we start, is that working? Everybody hear me all right?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Excellent. I can't hear overly well today because I've been hanging off the end of a chainsaw, so my hearing is a little bit suspect, shall we say. But thank you for all letting us have the time to come here and speak. You'll have to excuse if I waffle on a bit. Choosing my job. It's what I've done for 22 years. It's what I'm qualified in. And to be fair, subsidence, or alleged cases of movement from moisture removal rather than the alleged case of subsidence is something we deal with quite regularly nowadays. I've got a lot of stuff written down. In fairness, I'm probably not going to say half of it, but I do think there's some things that need to be brought straight up to members' attention. When you start actually going through all the reports, specifically the original engineer's report that was produced on the 10th of the 4th 2019, it doesn't confirm that moisture-related clay shrinkage has occurred. They're just of the opinion at that time, based on the evidence they had in front of them. There are one or two other inaccuracies within that report, part of which is taken from about page 47 in the document that you guys have got, part of which, on one of the paragraphs, the information turns around and says that the drain at the property was also surveyed, and the CCTV revealed no defects to the drainage system which could be allowing the escape of water in the area of concern. However, in the following paragraph, it goes on to say the results of the ground investigation indicate that the clay soil has been affected by the drying action of tree roots. Although the drain under the building is cracked and may be leaking, there is no evidence that this, and that is exactly how that finishes. No other detail to it, no nothing. It's almost as if that has been a cut and paste removed from somebody else's report. Now my argument to that is, which one is it? Is it cracked or isn't it? Because in one paragraph it's cracked, next paragraph it's not. Nobody really knows. Then we got the monitoring. They wanted to put monitoring in. We consider the level and crack width monitoring is required. This is to confirm the operation of clay shrinkage subsidence mechanism. The monitoring has been installed and the base reading obtained. This will continue on a 6-weekly basis. This would illustrate that at that point in time, clay shrinkage subsidence wasn't confirmed and only suspected based on the available information. The report was produced by Mr. Mavish Rashid, a claims technician, with input from Andrew Nibbs, BSc Honours, which was obviously the engineer. Yet there's no indication of which sections have been produced, by whom, or whether Mr. Nibbs' findings have been included in their entirety. To my eyes, with the cut off of one of the paragraphs, it's just a cherry-picked document, but that's by the by. We'll go back to the level monitoring. It should be noted that the level monitoring report produced on the 27th of the 3rd 2020 that all figures relating to the movement relative to datum are positive numbers. And while we appreciate that there is a reduction in height after the monitoring visit on the 11th of 6 2019, the reduction figure only represents 8 millimetres, far less than the 20 mil, and in the case of point 11, a 33 mil increase in height that has been recorded. This reduction in height would normally be put down to seasonal variation, irrespective of the presence of a tree, as most buildings, especially those on clay soil with a high volume change potential, this property has high volume change clay at the front, although the rear is recorded as medium, they all move up and down, dependent on normal soil moisture level seasonal fluctuations. These positive figures are completely contrary to all documented cases of moisture-related clay shrinkage, which normally shows us negative figure. Positive figure would normally indicate expansion of clay causing heave. It should also be noted that the most significant increase and fluctuation in these figures are directly related to the conservatory on the level monitoring points 11 and 12, which run above the rear drainage. Now that's fairly important, because obviously the rear drainage may or may not have a crack in it, but nobody really knows because the document's not exactly clear. Further to this, with the variation in movement recorded between the property and the conservatory, hang on, I might have made a mistake there. No. Further to this, the variation in movement recorded between the property and the conservatory would be in line with the fact that the property is a much heavier loaded structure with a much deeper foundation, and therefore more likely to be subject to lower increases and variations in height caused by soil expansion and contraction than the much lighter lowered conservatory with a much shallower foundation depth. This is further highlighted with the fact that the crack monitoring has only been carried out on the rear left-hand junction between house and conservatory, with a baseline reference taken at the front above the door. The baseline reference shows no movement within the with the conservatory crack showing movement, quite significant movement to be honest. This would indicate that the only area of significant movement is between the conservatory and the property, as indicated in the drawing contained within the Drainage Investigation Report dated the 1st of the 11th 2018, Auger Ref 85480.1.1.ICC, which clearly states the conservatory is coming away from the house. To date, the engineer's report has not been updated to include the findings of the level monitoring, or at least no copy of an updated engineer's report has been provided to the council, or is available, or to our knowledge to the council, or is available on the internet. Now I'm going to get to the one that I don't normally do. Foundation depth. Technically, foundation depth is an engineer's realm. It's not something I like to be involved with. We provide certain amounts of information to engineers regarding moisture demand, zone of influence. I know that the council's engineer has turned around and attempted to discount out zone of influence, but the NHBC expect us to provide it to engineers to help them inform their foundation designs. I know it's rubbish, if you want the truth. Route morphology is what it is. But we need to have a standard that we work to, hence the reason why the NHBC want us to utilise it. But we'll progress from there. As I said, foundation is not something that I'd rise. It's technically the engineer's realm. However, I do tend to check whenever we're asked to look at subsidence cases. I do tend to use both the LABC calculator that's available online, and I use the charts available from the NHBC. Anybody can look at them. It's very, very simple. As long as you've got a soil report that gives you your plasticity index and you've got some knowledge of what the tree's moisture demand is, then you don't have a problem. You can just scroll down the chart, very simply. On this one, using the LABC calculator, they're saying we should have a 1.98 metre foundation depth for a strip and mass fill foundation. That's the one that's been utilised at this property. The NHBC standards give me two different figures, depending on whether I use the low demand or I use the moderate demand. Now, moderate demand is at the back, moderate demand. Movement potential, I should say. Moderate movement potential is contained to the rear of the property. High movement potential is contained at the front of the property. If I use the high level movement demand, and I've got that wrong, so you're going to have to excuse me, I'm given a figure of 2.25 metres for the foundation depth. If I use moderate shrinkability, I'm at 1.75. Property's got, on the next page, no it's not. Now in the case of those figures, I haven't written down the actual foundation depth because I've forgotten. I'll hold my hand up to that. But the LABC figure is about 600 mil deeper than what's there. So we're looking around 1.35 metre foundation depth. If we use the foundation depth off of the conservatory, yes, I know it's a lighter loaded structure, we wouldn't normally have to push as deep, but building regs would say we'd need to be about a metre minimum. We're a lot more, we're about 1.1 metres deeper. That's what the NHBC standard says, and the LABC. With that being 1.1, we're left with around 600, 700 mil foundation under the conservatory. That's not even compliant with building regs. You know, it's always going to move. We've got a lightly loaded structure sitting on a completely separate strata from a soil perspective. We're going to have fluctuations left, right and centre, just physically because of that. Now, normally, in a lot of subsidence cases, mainly the ones that end up being taken to court, those figures become almost an irrelevance, because a lot of the properties that are dealt with are built pre-1970, 1980 at points, way before the introduction of the NHBC standards. In this case, the property was built post the standards, about 6 years. If the foundation is up, it's not the council's fault, it's not the homeowner's fault, it's whoever did the original design is at fault. Building engineers are liable for a very, very long time if they've made a miscalculation on foundations. To my eye, speaking as a tree man, not an engineer, because I'm not an engineer, the foundation's incorrect. The council really and truthfully, rather than spending their time getting an engineer to scrutinise what I had originally written, would be much better spending their time and their money asking the engineer who's taken the time to scrutinise what I've written to actually look at what that foundation depth should be. Because if it is out, then we need to be going back to the engineers. We don't need to be taking a tree down. We need to be looking at them to cover the cost of whether it's underpinning or anything else. And the other thing that may be missing on this, which I've almost forgotten to say, with the NHBC standards, if we have a foundation over 1.5 metres deep, we have to have a heave precaution put in. No heave precaution has been recorded on any of the soil investigation work. You take that tree down without a heave precaution in there, it will do exactly what we think it's doing now, and it will heave. Then you've got a bigger problem. The last heave job I had to be involved with came to £900 and something thousand because I ended up knocking the building down and starting again. All because an engineer miscalculated the foundation depth. And if we're going to make this decision, at least scrutinise what's been put out there from a foundation perspective, rather than looking to the insurance company's quick, cheap fix and their essentially get out of jail free card, because they're still looking to underpin. If they weren't looking to, if the tree was completely at fault, they wouldn't be looking to underpin. They wouldn't need to. They know there's still a fault if that's what they're proposing to do. That's pretty much all I've got to say. I'm sorry if I've yabbered on. I'm sorry if I've lost my point at various things, but I'm only a tree man and I ain't necessarily the best at doing engineering appraisals, so thanks for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Harper. Can I please now call Lady Colette Francis to come to the speakers' table?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and members for allowing me to speak. I'm hoping I don't repeat too much of the information, but as you can understand, we are quite passionate about this and something we have worked on for many months. I've just put it in bullet points. I don't want to drag it out more than it needs to be, so I'm just going to go with bullet points. So I hope you can keep up with me. Planning application details. The original planning application only refers to T1 within the property grounds in I Barnard's Way. This application only covers the grounds of the property of the address and no grounds past that boundary line which this tree, T2, resides. In the case of T2 being on council land and owned by the council, then the council should have to put in their own application of planning in, as it is with any other works they do. The ownership of the tree. The letter to the petitioner states that the council did not know the tree was theirs until January 2021, yet still gave permission for it to be felled in 2020. Again, as I've already touched upon, the application only covered the property grounds and nothing beyond the boundary line. As this is a case of council applying to council, firstly for the removal of the protection order and then to the fell, then surely ownership should have been established long before the decision was made. Moisture demand and zone of influence. These have been left out of the insurance ARB report, which become practice where subsidence is suspected. Although in Mr. Harris's comments, he states that this doesn't matter and isn't relevant. With vast amount of vegetation also to the right of the property, then surely this would be protocol to avoid any unreasonable doubt that this tree is solely to blame. I would also like to point out that since 7th of February 2022, extra pages have also been added to the original ARB report. These either weren't available to the public or have been created recently. The fact that whoever has added these pages to the original report dated 2020 has left in the appendix item pages too, which didn't exist until 2022. These extra pages are also listed separately under the 7th of February on documents of the application. Suspected silence. Again, I apologise for repeating others. Level monitor reports suggest a positive figure, which would actually indicate heave, not subsidence. The decision has been deemed mild by your own engineer's report. Ask any homeowner in Breton, we are all suffering some form of movement, my own included. I can't open my windows. This is very much weather dependent. Clay gets wet. As any of you ever tried to garden, it's sticky, it's not nice, it doesn't drain well. With this in mind, I would like to point out that the defects were only noticed by the homeowner in summer of 2018. In 2018, we had an extremely unusual dry year in total, with the particular summer months, with temperatures written a record-breaking 35.3 Celsius, only compared with 1976, 2003, 2006. This, unfortunately, with climate change, is increasingly becoming the norm. The conservatory, original planning application 9801011 FUL, states in condition 9 that no domestic enlargement shall be constructed within plots 4 or 5 other than those expressly authorised by this permission. This condition is not only there to protect the trees the houses are built around, but also the property from damage which could happen. This is also why the original plans were redrawn several times to protect both parties. We understand the current homeowners did not build this and have always said so. However, the idea of a conservatory is to be a temporary add-on, with a lifespan of 10 to 15 years at a push. With this conservatory pushing and probably exceeding the upper age limit, I'm not surprised it is pulling from the house. It happens to temporary structures, especially when it's time to upgrade. Appendix item 5 in the report's engineer's report. On the very last paragraph, the recommendation appears to be repair the home with a superstructure strengthening, repairs and redecoration. In other words, underpinning, which I believe other homes in the areas have also had due to the soil type, not because of any trees. If this work is recommended by the structural engineers to be carried out anyway, then why does the tree need to be removed? Just today in North Breton, the works have started on a car park. 80 mature trees are being felled. These trees will support over 1,400 people throughout their life in just oxygen. The planning environmental meetings. Unfortunately, this consultation period also fell within the COVID pandemic. Given the previous meetings were cancelled, with the only meeting in May the 12th, to which the only discussion was to put in a temporary measure to allow the head of planning sole authorisation to pick the agenda, and with a mere 48-hour window to raise concerns by members. Nor was this item raised in meetings in June or July. Now, under agenda item 4, action to be taken, section 4.212, I do dispute the statement that no evidence has been provided that the council constitution wasn't followed, as I've just expressed. You state that applications do not require to be determined by planning committees. However, these are done for full transparency of all parties, to declare any matters of interest, to ensure all the planning is correct and lawful. By saying they do not need to be debated at committees, would raise the question in the purpose of the committees and the expenses that follow. And on that thought, the purpose of the City Council and its members at all, if one person can make the decision. Thank you.
Thank you, Lady Francis. Now, may I call on to the presenters table, Kevin and Alice Benton, please, who will speak against the petition.
Good evening. Thank you for the Council's report in response to all matters so far. From our point of view, we bought the house in good faith in 2014, and it wasn't until it was 2018, as has already been stated, the hot summer, that we know that, well, we didn't just notice the cracks appeared, and we noticed straight away. The conservatory has been talked about quite a lot. The conservatory is the least of our matters. The cracks appeared in the living room, which is in the centre of the house. We had drop doors. There were cracks in the hallway. Significant movement of the conservatory has been stated. And every year since then, the cracks have got worse and worse and worse. There are movement in all houses, as we appreciate, but they've been getting worse and worse, and we've been keeping track of taking pictures of them, making sure. So we went to the insurance company to investigate the issue and figure out what the problem was. That was nearly 4 years ago, and it's been quite a lengthy process to go through. We've followed due process with the council and with the insurance company at all costs. We've made ourselves available to to let them investigate every single possibility of remediation, and we're not here to argue against the petition, or we're here just to ask for a resolution to this issue, which has been going on for nearly 4 years. We're not happy that the trees, I should say, have been identified as the cause of the issues. We bought the house. There was a tree in the garden, a tree just outside the boundary. They cause natural coverage to the light, and is a big feature of why we bought the house. So it is with a heavy heart that we are even here talking about this tree. The tree itself has not been without its own issues. About 2 years ago, in November, a 30-foot bough fell in between the houses and broke the fence all the way from the fence all the way up to the houses in between us and number 10. Luckily, it was a cold November day, and our young children were not outside. So we've had issues of branches falling down. That's going to happen with trees, but a 30-foot bough, it fell down so much that when it landed against, it missed the shed because it was so tall, it was so big. We've got pictures to support this. The council undertook the process to remove the TPOs a few years ago. We were told it was going to be an 18-month process. We followed that. There was a petition, I believe, against it at some point, not from the current petitioners, but and so we've been very, very patient and made ourselves available to anyone who wants to discuss the situation, and given access to our house to anybody who needs it. We've had Paul Bristow come round to talk about it, and he saw the damage in our house, and I appreciate he's in support of finding the right solution. As I say, we're here just to try and bring this matter to get a decision either way. We are, as you can appreciate, any more delays is going to take us into up to 4 years in September. Any decision that takes longer than that is going to push it onto 5 years. We have a young family. We're working hard to try and provide a life for our little boy, and we would just want to be able to move on and fix our house, to fix the doors, to fix the small bits of damp in the doors. Conservatory has been mentioned quite a lot, and actually that's at the far end of the house, and the tree that was affecting that has been taken down. The rest of the house is down the middle and to our neighbour's side, which is on the other side. So the tree is right in the middle of the boundaries. So we're not here to say yes, that's the issue. We're following what has been said by all the experts that have been employed. There's been 4, 5, 6 companies involved in looking at the issues. We haven't actually had a decision on what is wrong, what needs to be remediated in the house until the house has been settled, which is what we've been told. So we've been told initially the kitchen's going to need to be reinforced above the front door, which the lintels above there are going to need to be reinforced. Again, these are reinforced. These are in the middle of the house. These are nowhere near the conservatory. So, you know, anybody who would like to see the house or see pictures of the house, we're quite happy and open enough to show the issues that we have with the house. And as I say, all we are looking for is remediation to stabilise our house and enable us to have a house that can be insured and be protected long term. So we're here just to try and get to a resolution some way or the other so we can move forward. So thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Benton. Did Alice want to speak as well, or you just spoke on our behalf as well? You probably have. Right, thank you. The committee have also received a written statement from Mr. and Mrs. Mulcara. Oh, you didn't receive it? No. Okay. Apologies, we didn't receive it in the end. They couldn't join on the team meeting. Mr. Benton, did you want to say something?
Yeah, sorry, they had to go abroad for family reasons, so that's why they couldn't make tonight.
That's fine, yeah, thank you. Thank you. I would now like to invite the following officers to come to the presenters table to introduce the report. Richard Kay, Head of Sustainable Growth Strategy, Darren Sharp, Natural and Historic Environment Manager, Sue Addison, Insurance Manager, Paul Harris, Chartered Engineer, is also attending virtually via Teams. Thank you. Do we need to get another table around square? Or? Would you like to introduce the report, please?
Thank you, Chair. So, yes, just to introduce myself first. My name is Richard Kay. I'm Head of Sustainable Growth Strategy. And could my colleagues just introduce themselves, and I'll do a brief introduction to the report. So,
Darren Sharp. I'm the Natural and Historic Environment Manager for the City Council.
Sue Addison. I'm the Council's Insurance Manager.
So, thank you, Chair. I'll be very brief. I appreciate there's a lot of information here and a lot of background to this particular case, and you've obviously just heard some more information as well from our speakers. So I won't be taking you through all of that detail. Hopefully you've had opportunity to read the report and the various appendices that go with it. Just a reminder to everybody, you mentioned it, Chair, but it's again just worth reminding everybody that obviously tonight's not about making a decision, it's about you as scrutiny recommending to Cabinet to make what you recommend to Cabinet that their decision should be. And the intention is that Cabinet on the 21st of February, so that's just next week, will ultimately take that decision one way or the other. So as I say, the paper sets out at length the process that this case has gone through, the issues involved and the options available to the Council. If I was to just sum it up, as I say, I'm not going to take you through the whole report, but if I was just to sum it up in a paragraph, could I take you to paragraph 4.6.4, which I think that kind of sums up in a nutshell what this case is all about. And it, in effect, is about you as scrutiny advising to Cabinet on really two choices. Do you advise Cabinet to save the tree and be willing to pay the costs and the sums involved in that? Or do you take the difficult decision that the costs involved are too great and therefore the tree cannot be saved? That, in simple terms, is what this is all about. But I appreciate there's a lot of information and background that goes towards that consideration. So that's it by way of introduction. Obviously, myself and colleagues are here to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Did you want to speak at the other two officers or straight to questions? Thank you very much. Members, do we have questions, please? Councillor Judy Fox, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for your report. My question is, in the emails, correspondence between the tree officer and the insurance. And the second one is, could you answer, with regards to the ownership of T2 tree, at this time I cannot confirm that T2 is the ownership of Peterborough City Council. This is something I'm looking into presently. I'll update you once I have further information on this matter. That is obviously from the tree officer. I can't find anything else in the report, any more correspondence to say what the answer was. Could you actually inform me on that, please?
If I could just start that Chair. I mean, the ownership of the tree issue is covered at 4.3 in your covering report. That's the latest information on the ownership and the issues surrounding ownership. Was there some specific question beyond that? Thank you.
If we don't, then we move on to the next question and we could come back to that. Councillor Joseph.
Thank you, Chair. As you so rightly stated, there's been a lot of information from all sides, for and against, etc. And we seem to have two varying examples of what might have caused the damage. Is it normal to have such wide variances in opinions of what causes damage? And if so, what is the normal recourse to treatment? Should we be getting a third independent review, or is this just the norm and it's really down to people to decide which sort of way they want to go?
Through you, Chair, I'm obviously no expert I'm not an engineer or a tree expert for that matter. We obviously online we do have our expert. Perhaps this is a good opportunity to bring in our colleague online, if you may want to introduce themselves and perhaps help with that question, if that's okay, Chair.
Yeah, Paul. I think you're on mute. No, sorry, we can't hear you. Should we get the technician? I think we might be able to hear you now. Should I just go? Yeah. Yeah. Paul, we're just checking on our side.
Can you hear me, Paul? If you want to log out and log back in again, we'll see if that works. It's nothing at our end, it does seem to be your end.
Can anybody hear me? No?
Ah, yes, we've got you now.
Right. Right. So, can you hear me now? Unfortunately, I can't see you now, which doesn't help.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Ah, right. Okay. But unfortunately, I can't see anybody. Oh, I can see somebody.
Perfect. We can hear you and we can see you too, Paul.
Okay. So I think the question at one stage was in relation to the number of different opinions that appeared to be put forward. I think there are only really two separate opinions here. The first is the opinion of the insurer's engineers. They say that the damage is the product of tree-related subsidence. I am an engineer who specialises in this kind of thing. I've now been dealing with tree-related subsidence for a few weeks of 40 years. I also say that the damage is the product of subsidence associated with tree roots. Mr. Harpham has a different view. I have produced a report which comments on why I think he is mistaken in his view that the damage is the result of subsidence, or at least he suggests that it's the result of heave. Unfortunately, you know, I can't do more than put forward those comments in relation to the way that perhaps he might have misinterpreted the monitoring readings.
Thank you, Mr. Harris. And now, next question, Councillor Day.
Sorry, thank you. This is a really difficult meeting to have, actually, because whilst I sympathise with the homeowner, I also sympathise with the tree as well. It's an amazing source of biodiversity, and it's had a tree protection order on it since 1970, so it's been valued for a long time. And it does seem to me that and it says in the letter to the petitioner on page 2, it actually says to the petitioner, the permission to build 9 Barnard Way was granted in 1988. Proposals as consented should not cause conflict with the trees, and as we've heard, the NHBC standards which were supposed to be complied with were not complied. So it seems that builders and developers, as they often do and are becoming more and more frequently doing, are building things that they shouldn't be, with the wrong materials, in the wrong places. And I definitely think a recommendation should come out of this meeting that this sort of thing never happens again. But my question is, to Paul Harris, the structural engineer, and I know we've talked about ownership, and I was trying to read what it said on 4.2.8 about having ownership and consent to fell, and it doesn't matter who owns the tree. But Paul Harris, who, in your opinion, who does own the tree?
I'm not sure that I am the right person to answer that. Sorry, can you hear me again?
Yes, we got you.
Oh, sorry. I'm not sure that I'm the right person to answer that. I'm an engineer. I'm not an employee of the council, so I'm not sure that I am the right person for that one.
Any of you, Richard, or anybody from that table can answer it?
Yeah, as I said earlier, Chair, that there is some commentary in the report on the ownership of the tree and the implications of that. It has been of some doubt who owns it. However, we are of the clear view, as we sit here now today, that on the basis that the council's maintained that tree for at least 15 years, that we have responsibility for that tree. And on that basis, any nuisance that tree causes is our responsibility to deal with. That's the simple fact of it, as we see it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Kay. Councillor Skipstead and then next. Sorry, Emma.
Thank you, Chair. I would like to comment on the report page, I think it's 19, where you've outlined the various solutions and how much they cost. It does sort of come across, I mean, before we get to that point, it also comes across as though the report is trying to justify felling the tree rather than thinking of ways to save the tree. Looking at the various solutions, they bring up lots of scenarios that haven't happened, or they might happen, as a sort of negative, but we don't know they would happen because it's in the future. I want to comment on the constructing of root barriers, because it seems that the price you've put in there is extremely high, 30 to 40,000. Is this a quote? Have we had several quotes? Because I know that in some situations with the council that there's been quotes, figures given, and then there's been found a solution that's considerably cheaper to do that. And so have we looked into that? Have we looked into other areas where this has been done? And all those what ifs, you know, you can never know what's going to happen, but this is a possibility of saving the tree rather than rather than going to the worst case scenario. It seems to me which would be felling the tree. So I'd just like to ask a bit more about the constructing of root barriers and the pricing you've put there. Thank you.
I'll start with that question, Chair, but some of my colleagues may want to chip in if necessary. To answer the first question, have we got a formal quote? No, is the answer to that one. Root barriers are a relatively new concept, if you like, for dealing with tree issues. I'm not saying it's completely new, they do exist around the country, but it's not something, to the best of our knowledge, we've ever done here in Peterborough. Certainly not in the last 10 or 15 years, and I don't believe we ever have. It's difficult to estimate the costs. We know it would involve at least going across 2 properties, gardens. So it wouldn't be in our control, is a key issue. So it certainly wouldn't take place on our land. It would have to take place on private land, the 2 affected homeowners. So compensation would have to be agreed there if that was the route we went down. But the biggest issue, I would suggest, is not only there is a significant cost, we don't know the actual cost, but there will be a cost, that route. But the biggest issue is it's unproven. And therefore, the big risk would be that we implement this cost, whatever it might be, we pay the compensation to implement it as well on top of all that, and then it fails because either the roots go under it, around it, over it, or whatever. It simply fails to abate the nuisance. And therefore, we'll be back to square one, having spent a great deal of money, and then back to the same situation of do we underpin, do we fell a tree, etc., etc. So, yes, it is an option, but it's a very risky option in our view at still some cost. Not as great a cost as underpinning would be. It won't be in that sort of order of sums, but it's still a significant cost. So in a nutshell, that's why that option has been looked at, but is not presently recommended by officers. Thank you.
If I could just add to that, just briefly, one of the major problems with root barriers, personally I think the costs are in the right bracket, but one of the major problems with root barriers is because they are risky and rather unproven, they have an impact on the saleability, or rather the mortgageability of the house. And it may well be that if a root barrier was installed, the householder would find themselves in a position where they were unable to sell the property because what they have is not a guaranteed solution to the problem, but a solution that might, or just possibly might not work. Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry, you can't ask. No, you can't ask questions or explanations. You've already done your presentation. Is that correct?
As possibly the only person who's put a root barrier in, we've been doing like for about 30 years. You might be in London on Facebook, and they don't follow that often.
I don't think they need to speak. It's not. Yeah. Okay. Councillor Sanford.
So can I just come back on that? Given the answers I've been given, is it possible that could be looked into a little more? Because I would say that this felling the tree has got to be the last resort, and everything needs to be investigated as fully as possible, because we've got a 600-year-old tree here. It's like a national heritage, really. Surely we need to look at everything that's possible and have felling the tree as the last resort. Thank you.
Does that require answer, or do you want to put that as a recommendation at the end? Yeah, put that. Yeah, bring it at the end. Councillor Sanford.
Yeah, I've got a couple of questions, but just to comment on that, though, my professional job is I work for a conservation charity, and I'm certainly aware of quite a number of instances where root barriers have been put in. I can't really comment on the effectiveness of them. I've basically got two questions. One is about the issue of the cost, and the other one is about the liability. And so with regards to the cost, I'd like to refer members to Appendix 2, because we've seen a lot of figures quoted in the reports that if the council decides to retain the tree, the costs could go into hundreds of thousands of pounds. Yet, if you look at Appendix 2, which is the original application that PRI Insurance made to the council for consent to effectively override the tree preservation order, partway down the page they say that the tree works which are proposed and the need for repairs to be carried out are likely to vary between 28,000 if the tree is taken out, or 75,000 if the tree is kept. So I think my question is, if this is the figure coming from the insurer, which is basically about to make a claim against the council, why would they grossly underestimate the amount of their claim? And I think the other thing, that if you actually look at Appendix 2, it's clear from the actual application that they are talking about a tree situated at 9 Barnard Way, and I think one thing that is clear is that tree T2, which is the tree that we're talking about, is not situated at 9 Barnard Way. It's actually in Blind Lane. So would that not indicate there was some flaw in the process by which the consent was actually granted?
Thank you. Okay, who would like to answer that, please?
I'll start, Chair. Again, the covering report has a number of paragraphs on financial considerations. That's within section 4.5. There's a number of paragraphs there just to remind members of that. I don't actually know why the original applicant came, or how the original applicant came up with those figures quoted. I accept that obviously there. We've taken into account our own experience of underpinning costs that this council's undertaken itself on a property not too far away from this particular one, and the cost to the council to underpin that property was in the region of £200,000, and that property was certainly no bigger. It was probably slightly smaller than the property we're talking about now. So that's the basis of our estimates of costs. We think the 75,000 quoted in the application was a significant underestimate of what the true costs would be. The issue around process was a second question. Again, that's covered at quite some length in the covering report. We are entirely satisfied that due process was followed and a lawful consent is in place. But the full details are covered in the covering report. Thank you.
Could I go on to my next question now?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So, okay, I do think it's really odd, though, that the insurer's only saying they want to claim only a fraction of what you're saying the cost will be. So I think that's a contradiction. As regards whether the council would be liable, I think, you know, we've had some discussion about the actual ownership, but I think the point's been made that, you know, even if it's the owners of the property who were responsible for the tree, that they would probably want to remove it. So the actual ownership issue is slightly academic, but that, I think the liability point, though, is quite a germane one, because there's a number of options that the cabinet ultimately has. They could decide to keep the tree, that they could decide to remove the tree, or they could just allow the insurers to actually put in a claim. Now, one of the problems, because I'm actually aware of a number of these cases happening in different parts of the country, the local authority quite often caves in because they don't want to go to court. But the question that I'm coming to is the point that Mr. Harpham was talking about, though, is that, you know, if the case went to court, would the council be held liable for the tree? Because if you remember the point that Mr. Harpham was making, that at the time the house was constructed, it was clear that everybody was aware about the proximity of the tree. I believe there was initial planning application, it was refused, and then the position of the house was actually altered to take it further away from the tree. There was a condition put on that nothing could be attached onto the house because of the proximity of the tree. So, wouldn't it have been a reasonable thing for the council to have assumed that the house and the conservatory would have been built to the NHBC standards, which would have ensured that the house and the conservatory had foundations that were sufficient to cope with the presence of the tree? So I think, and this is the point I would like to put to the officers here, that isn't what Mr. Harpham's saying true, that if this case went to court, the people who could be held liable would not be the council, but the original structural engineers who had advised the people who were constructing their house.
Who would like to answer that, please?
Chair, Councillor Sandford, that there are two issues with any claim of this nature. The first is the liability to abate the nuisance, And the second is liability for any damage the trees caused. I can't talk about this particular claim specifically because it's ongoing and obviously there are data protection issues. But in general, we would look at first, do we own the tree? Is there sufficient evidence that it is causing subsidence? And if so, we have a legal duty to abate that nuisance, which would involve either felling the tree, undertaking works, or underpinning, or some other method of abating the nuisance. And that would be the case for any tree that we own where it's been proved that it's causing subsidence. And then you move on to the second issue of, is there a liability for the damage that that tree has caused? And I can't talk in open forum about whether that's the case here because it's an ongoing insurance claim. But they are two separate issues.
Thank you. Thank you for your answer. Co-opted Councillor Sandways.
Yeah, thanks. Just coming back to your opening statement, Richard, on the liability, and I think this kind of builds on Councillor Sandford's point. So in paragraph 4.5.9, you talk about potential. Are we talking about potential 200,000 per property? So there's 2 properties affected with a potential 3 others. So we're suggesting that there's a potential total liability to the council of £1 million.
To underpin a property of this sort of size costs in the region of £200,000. I can't give you a precise figure, but that, as a ballpark figure, that's what it would be. We knew at the time of the application there was 1 property involved. We now know there's 2 properties, albeit for the second one we're still awaiting the full details, but we're now aware of a second one, and then that was always a significant risk at the time. So 2 times 2 is obviously 400,000. You can follow best practice guidance, and essentially you can draw a circle around a tree and say any property within that circle is at risk. Now these 2 properties that we already know about are at the highest risk because they are nearer to the tree. There are another 3 properties within that circle of risk, if you like, but they are significantly further away and therefore a much lower risk, but you can't rule it out as a potential. So theoretically, the sum could start to head towards £1 million, but that's at the very upper end of risk. The 2 properties we are aware of are the ones of significant risk.
Okay. Can I ask a subsequent question? Then, so the value placed on the tree at 330,000, that's an approximation. So, can I just ask, if the tree were to be felled, would the council then need to invest the equivalent of 330,000 in mitigation, in new tree planting, to account for the loss of that tree and that community environmental benefit that tree provides?
In a word, no. You're talking about caveat values of trees, which I may turn to my colleague Darren, who knows a little bit more about that. But essentially, what the caveat value is it tries to place a value on something which is not you can't buy and sell in, typically. So it tries to make an estimate of something that you can't then go on to trade, obviously. So what it tries to take into account is its landscape value, its biodiversity value, its flood prevention value, and then tries to work out. And then there's formulas, this caveat formula that's an industry standard to try and work out, roughly speaking, what is that value that tree will provide. Now, if that tree goes, it doesn't automatically. There's no legal requirement to provide that value somewhere else. Now, we do have a policy of replacement trees. In this particular case, we've always had a commitment that we would replace it with 6 other trees in the locality, in an area which obviously wouldn't go on to harm properties, obviously. Clearly, those 6 trees, as you plant them, would not have the same value, but over time you would hope that they would equally create caveat value in themselves, albeit it would obviously take time. So that's the mechanism we would go through. So you can literally put a price on every single tree anywhere and bigger trees have a bigger value and smaller trees have a smaller value. Hopefully that explains the process.
Well, kind of, but I think 6 trees to mitigate the loss of a 600-year-old tree is probably falls some way short in my view, but that's probably a different discussion.
Thank you. Did you say Darren was going to come in?
Only, Chair, if you need a greater explanation of the technicalities
I think
of
you've answered it well. Councillor Wiggin?
Thank you, Chair. So we've heard from two experts in their fields tonight who are adamantly stating that they are right and the other one is wrong. I am not an expert on trees, and yet I'm on this committee and I need to make a decision on this tree. When we have evidence from two experts that is so opposed, how are we supposed to, as a committee, come to the right decision about what to do?
Chair, I think that's probably a question for you all to debate amongst yourselves. We're obviously presenting the evidence to you. We've commissioned our own expert evidence, which you've obviously got here available to answer questions, and that's the evidence that we're relying upon.
Absolutely. Thank you, Richard. Councillor Joseph?
Thank you, Chair. I'm going back to the question of the 6 trees that are being planted to replace this one. Is that an absolute guarantee, given the cuts and the 2 tree operations and the moratorium on capital spend? Will that go ahead regardless? And again, coming back to my previous question and raised by Councillor Wiggin, obviously you've got two experts' opinions which are diametrically opposed. So there must be some middle ground at which you can agree, or because if Mr. Harpen's report is correct and we approve and our report is not, then there's serious damage is going to be caused by removing these trees. So surely in this instance we should go back and look at these reports again, because it's not like they're just this much apart, they're worlds apart, and therefore there must be a reason for that.
In terms of the first question about the replacement trees, yes, that will happen. If the tree is felled, sorry, I'll be able to qualify that. In terms of going back to the evidence, that's exactly what we've done. Once we got the independent report submitted on behalf of the petitioners, that's where we've recommissioned Mr. Harris to have another look at that, again, to test that evidence, to see if there's anything new in there that perhaps Mr. Harris hadn't seen or was aware of, etc., etc. And that's the report that you've now been presented with. So we have gone back and checked that evidence. Thank you.
Yeah.
So Mr. Harris has gone back and qualified his own report. Isn't that a bit like trying to proofread your own stuff? What we're saying is, should not an independent person look at both reports and come up with an opinion?
That can only be, so Chair, that if that's a recommendation of committee, that's what you can do. That's not a recommendation of officers, though.
Yeah, if you wish to put that recommendation at the end, you do that. Councillor Sanford?
Yeah, Councillor Joseph has just raised the same point I was going to raise. It seems to me, because I think one of the things that the committee has to do is to reach an opinion on this particular tree, but I think also it needs to make recommendations about process. And it seems to me quite extraordinary that you've got 2 experts who, one expert has one opinion, one has a contradictory opinion. So why did you then go back to the original person and sort of ask him, because it was obvious what his opinion was going to be? So would it not have made sense to have gone to a third person who could have actually and sort of almost arbitrated between the two?
I suppose that question's answered, is it? That this can go in as a recommendation at the end if they wish to put the recommendation. Councillor Day?
Yeah, I agree with having an independent expert to look at both and to come up with a solution, because it's really difficult. We've got a really strong argument that it could be heave and a very strong argument that it could be subsidence. There's contradictions about what a person said, but I can't talk about those unless we talk about the exempt report.
Thank you. Yeah, so that doesn't require an answer. Was there any other councillors on this side, or? Councillor Joseph.
Thank you, Chair. Can I just ask, when you went back to Mr Harris to review the reports, was that an additional fee that you paid him to review his own report?
Chair, as the insurance manager, it was me who commissioned Mr Harris, and first I have to say he is an independent expert. He's not employed by the council.
Sorry, we can't hear you very well. Can you put the microphone a little bit nearer?
Can you hear me better now?
Yeah, that's better. Yeah.
Sorry. I was the one who commissioned Mr Harris. He is an independent expert. He's not employed by the council, and as he says, he has 40 years experience. And the second point I'd like to make is that when he reviewed the information, he was reviewing a lot more information than Mr Harpham had available, because he saw all the information that we received as part of the insurance claim, and for data protection reasons that can't be made public. So his report was based on all the information available, a lot more monitoring, a lot more information that Mr Harpham didn't have. And we did ask him to reply to Mr Harpham's report, because that could be in the public forum, because Mr Harpham's report was. And we thought it would be helpful for that to be commented upon. But his original report, which is exempt, had access to a lot more background evidence that was available through the claim.
Sorry, my question was, when he went back to review the evidence of Mr Harpenden versus his report, was he paid an additional fee for that?
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you. Councillor Burbidge.
Thank you, Chair. As a councillor in Bretton, I know that there's a lot of emotion around this topic, in particular this tree. Bretton's lost a lot of trees in recent months, recent years. I'd like to ask the officers what they think would need to happen in order to find a satisfactory outcome for all parties.
I think ultimately that's the question for Cabinet to reach. From our perspective is, as I spelled out right at the start, it's not that this tree is some kind of got a disease or a health or safety issue or something like that. The tree can be saved, but it will cost a significant amount of money. So that is the question, that in terms of implementing the consent that exists, is the council willing to spend those sums of money that this report refers to? That ultimately is the question to be debated and issued. So that's when we took the decision. We were proposing to implement the consent. We took into account the costs involved and believed it wasn't value for money on the scale of things, not only in this case, but also the precedent that it might set. Obviously, this council looks after hundreds of thousands of trees, and there will be many more of these examples that will occur over the coming years. It's inevitable, and it's happened in the past. There's been other trees that we've had to fell, unfortunately, because of subsidence issues or other nuisance issues that we've had to deal with. So, taking all of that in the round, we came to the conclusion that this tree, sadly, we don't do this for pleasure by any means. Sadly, we took into account all of the issues and recommended that it be felled. However, we are where we are now today, that it's come to this, following the petition, it went to full council, it's come to this scrutiny, it's going to Cabinet to make that final decision, and it will be ultimately Cabinet's decision what it wants to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. Councillor Skipstead.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to ask, Mr. Harris came back on Mr. Harpham's report. Was Mr. Harpham not given the opportunity to then come back on the comments made about his report to be able to qualify or comment further on what was being said was not true? Was that possible for him to do that?
He's obviously had the opportunity, Chair, to speak this evening. There wasn't a subsequent request other than the opportunity to speak this evening.
Thank you. Co-opted Councillor Sandwich.
Thanks, Chair. It's just a question in respect to what Mr. Harpham said. If I understood it correctly, the suggestion was that there was a miscalculation in the design of the foundations and the foundation depth, and it wasn't in accordance with the NHBC guidance at the time. Now, I don't know if that's been thoroughly investigated, but if that is the case, then potentially there could be a claim against the designers or the engineers' professional indemnity insurance, even though it was 20 years ago. So I wondered if that had been considered as an option or should be considered as an option, or not.
If I could, Chair, none of the officers here today were around at the time of the original planning application, but going back to the files which do still exist on that planning application, that a lawful planning application was submitted, gained consent, was built in accordance with that consent, it gained its building regulations, consents and certificates, etc., all following due process and best standards as were applicable at that time. Now, best standards and things do move on and have moved on, and as we are here today, if that same house is applied for in the same position, different standards may well apply, but obviously those things are not retrospectively applied. So, to the best of our knowledge, everything was done in accordance with the appropriate laws and regulations at the time that house was constructed.
Thank you. Is there any more? Councillor Sanford?
Yeah, I want to come back on 2 points, really. The first one is something that Mr. Kay said in a previous comment, when he was saying that, you know, if the council were to decide to actually keep this particular tree, then there could be a number of other cases come up which would incur a lot more cost to the council. But isn't it also possible, as an alternative scenario, if the council effectively caves in on this claim and basically removes the tree, isn't it possible that other insurance companies who are approached by their clients who have cracks in their houses may look for the proximity of council trees, because it may be apparent to the insurance companies that Peterborough is a council that does not contest these claims, that will just actually take out the trees.
Just to clarify some of those remarks there, I didn't say that there would be additional costs for other trees elsewhere. What I said was, or I'll clarify the remark if I didn't say it clearly enough, is that if we save this tree, then clearly a precedent is starting to be set. That precedent doesn't have to be followed elsewhere, but it generally creates an expectation that we would follow the same precedent, that precedent that's been set elsewhere, and that would incur significant costs. But obviously a council could make a one-off in this case and pay the significant sums in this case, and then not so when the next case happens somewhere else. But that was what if I didn't say clear enough, that's what I meant. The bit about insurance companies, I can't possibly comment on what insurance companies will or won't do in the future.
Okay, just to come back on a further point, the point that Mr. Kay made regarding the fact that when the foundations of the house were put in place, they complied with the NHBC standards at the time. Now, what Mr. Harpham appeared to be saying to us was, in his view, that at that time the NHBC standards required that if you got a tree in the proximity, the foundations of the house should have been built to a sufficient depth to take account of that. So have you checked to see whether the foundations of the house were compliant with the NHBC standards that were applicable at the time?
What we've checked, as I understand it, is we've checked were all the relevant permissions and in place at the time that was built. That's not just planning, that's the building regulations, etc. Now, we haven't, as far as I'm aware, dug foundations and checked were they literally built to those conditions at the time, but they wouldn't have received building regulations certification if they hadn't. Or that's how the building regulation system works, that they're not paper exercises, they are actually physically checked on site in order to get your building regulation certificate. So our records indicate that all of those consents were done correctly and are in place.
Yeah, I do think it's a pertinent point though, because again, thinking back to what Mr. Harpham said in my hearing of it, was that, you know, that could affect what liability the council had. So I do think it's a pertinent point.
Thank you. Councillor Day?
Yeah, thank you. It's my understanding that you have the tree which is on the outside of the fence, and then after that tree you then have a drainage ditch, but that drainage ditch I've seen is full of silt and it's quite blocked, it's quite weeded, it's not really been cleared out at all, and given this is about water in the soil and the movement of a house, would this have anything to do with the issue of the drainage of the soil? It's not really been mentioned anywhere in any of the reports. And also I just wanted to ask about the whole, you know, when we talk about costs and who's going to pay for it, will this be coming from our tree budgets? Will our tree budgets be paying for something if the council is deemed to be liable? And is that what our tree budget should be being used for?
Thank you.
I'll answer the second question. I may turn to my colleague Mr Harris in terms of the drainage ditch issue and whether he has any information on that one. But in terms of, well, if the council, if the felling option is taken, then that's obviously low cost. That would come from our budget, and that's within our normal sort of cycle of budget. So that's that would be fine. If the greater expenses are options are taken, whether that's the underpinning at the greatest cost or some other option, then they're not budgeted for, and therefore the council would have to make a decision where it found that money. That's not for me to decide. That would be for Cabinet ultimately to decide whether it would find new money to pay for that as an exception, or direct it to come from the tree budget. So I can't actually answer that as a direct answer, but that would be a matter for Cabinet to decide. I don't know if Mr Harris heard the first question and is able to help on the ditch issue, and whether that's
the silting up of the ditch is unlikely to have any material effect. If it had any effect at all, it would be purely peripheral. It would be very, very minor indeed. Although the ditch is silted up, it still operates in that water still collects in the silted soil in the way that the ditch was originally intended to function. It perhaps doesn't function quite as well as it used to, but as I say, it is not the cause of the current difficulties, and the silting up would have minimal effect, let's say. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I think that's it for the questions. Councillor Sharp.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, we've touched on it before in relation to the cost for underpinning. So in 4.5.8, you mention in the report there that we've previously underpinned the house for around £200,000 for a similar sort of scenario. I'm just interested in whether we think legally we've set a precedent for that, so that if we don't underpin this house, or we don't cut the tree down, have we set a precedent in terms of liability? Just interested in that view.
No, we haven't. Every case against the council is considered on its own merits, so every set of circumstances would be different. There's no precedent set.
Thank you. Councillor Joseph.
Thank you, Chair. Obviously, you were speaking about precedents earlier on. Are we not risking setting a precedent whereby we have two independent reports and the council deems it will go with its own commissioned report rather than taking into account the expert testimony of another expert? And you know, we've talked a lot about if we don't do this, we'll incur these costs. But if Mr Harpen was right, as I understand it, and this was all caused by heave, then there would be no cost to the council. So are we not shooting ourselves in the foot before making sure that we don't have any cost to pay, rather than just considering what we might have to pay if we are right and if we don't do this and if we don't do that? Because if it is heave, then we don't actually have a liability, as I understand it. Or I could be wrong, because I'm no expert either.
Sorry, I missed a question in that one as well. So did you miss?
My question is, are we not setting a precedent ourselves by ignoring the testimony of an expert that we haven't commissioned and therefore shooting ourselves in the foot?
Who would like to answer that?
No, I think. The evidence that we got from the insurance company wasn't just the report that Mr Harpham's seen, it was a whole raft of information, and it was on the basis of that that Mr Harris, who is an independent expert, reached his view, which happens to agree with the engineering expertise of the insurance company as well. Mr Harpham's only had sight of very limited information, and as he said himself, he's not an engineer, he's a tree expert. So the actual engineering expert that we applied, who agreed with the insurance company's engineer, we felt satisfied that we could rely on that opinion.
Thank you. Councillor Day.
Yeah, I'm still grappling with the whole the building standards and the foundations, was it NHBC? NHBC standards that weren't complied with, and I think whether the times have moved on or not, that tree has had a tree protection order since the 1970s. That tree protection order has been there longer than the house is, longer than the estate, and I really feel for the homeowners, absolutely. But what are we going to do? Just ignore all our tree protection orders now on all of our trees? You know, I think the question I'm trying to ask is this not something that the planning committee or the planning department should be looking into and dealing with? I'm not sure if it's a growth, environment and resources committee issue. I think it's more of a planning issue, and I think there have been historical mistakes made, and we've got people that have been really affected through no fault of their own, but because developers and builders have not paid attention to what they should have been doing. And therefore, if that can be proven, then the council surely shouldn't be the ones to have to foot the bill for this. That's a long question, I guess, but is it a planning issue?
Just to clarify with members that I don't think it's a planning issue now, because it was originally, because that's when the application comes in. But just so we're all absolutely clear, a lawful consent now exists, and we can't suddenly say, no, it doesn't. The only way that could be revoked would have to be some kind of legal challenge or otherwise. We can't reverse that decision whether we want to or not. So that consent exists. The question we've got is, do we implement that consent? So that's why it's an issue for yourselves of scrutiny, debating whether we should or recommend up to Cabinet. So ultimately it's now a decision for Cabinet, not planning. Planning have made their decision, they've given consent for it to be felled. It's now a decision of whether the Council, via Cabinet, decides to commit the money to implement it or come up with a different option. Thank you.
Thank you. I've just got a quick small question, I'll put that in. Are you able to forecast a finite cost? In other words, if we push this back, say 6 months or a year, or wait for another report, or maybe 2 years, obviously the cost of the liability increases. Are you able to forecast that, or is that something that haven't been looked at?
It's a very good question. I was actually going to, if it didn't come up, I was going to raise my hand to mention it anyway, that just to highlight to members, at 4.7 is timing considerations, a section there where I summarise some of the issues from timing. It's not a case that if you delay 6 months, there might be a little bit more money, or delay it 6 years, there might be a bit more money than that. Our view is, if we delay this further, the consent actually lapses, so we'd have to go through that process again and again, so the timing, etc., carries on. There's a number of other issues around timing that I set out. But effectively, if Cabinet decide in this non-growing season that we're in now, this winter, if we wait until another growing season of that tree occurs and the ground starts to dry like it will every year, and the cracks start to appear again or get bigger or whatever, or more, or new cracks start to appear, then the council has known about this for such a long period of time now that the insurance company, to put it in simple words, will probably just lose patience, because we've known about it and we've not taken action to do anything about it, and therefore the risk is it's taken out of our hands, and then it's an unknown liability because we're not in control of what's going on then. If we do take action this winter, or determine what that course of action is, and we progress with that action, then we would expect the insurance companies to work with us on that. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Councillor Sanford again.
Yeah, I just need to come back. If this was a full council meeting, I would have a pink card I could hold up on a point of accuracy, because what Richard has said is not true, because the council can grant consent under a tree preservation order. The council can rescind the consent. Now, you're absolutely right. Either the decision to grant the consent could be open to legal challenge, or the decision to rescind it could be. But to actually say that we can't do that is not true.
Councillor Wigan.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I just wanted to make sure that I'm understanding correctly and that all members are understanding correctly when we're talking about liability, what we're actually saying, because the decision to fell the tree is not directly because there is damage to the house and to do with the council's liability for that. It's to do with the nuisance aspect, as it's called. I know there's been this debate on whether you can call a tree a nuisance, but in legal parlance, that's where we are. So the decision on felling the tree or paying large money to put in various methods to stop the tree causing a nuisance is an entirely separate issue to whether the council is liable for the damage to the property which has been caused, and as we mentioned, the various potential issues along the way. So are we required to make a decision on that side of it, or is that still subject to an ongoing legal case? And do we just need to look at the issue of whether we fell the tree or put something else in place? Is that really all we need to be focusing on?
In that sense, yes. But the two are, although they're separate, they're also linked. At the moment, there's a separation between meeting our legal duty to mitigate the nuisance and do we have liability for the existing damage. But as Richard said, because we've known for so long, we need to make a decision now, because if we don't and that tree goes into a further growing season, the insurance company then within their rights to say, you haven't mitigated the loss in a reasonable period, so we're going to underpin that property because you've left us no choice. And the council would then be responsible for the entire cost of that. So the decision would be taken out of our hands what we want to do.
Thank you. Councillor Sanford.
Yeah, this is where we come to the exempt report, because there is material in the exempt report that is relevant to that, and I would like to have an opportunity to ask Mr. Harris some questions about the material that's in there. So.
Sorry, Councillor Sanford, we can't do that. You're not a member of...
I think, Chair, what I was saying is it would need to be a member of the committee asking to go into closed session if that's what you want to do.
Councillor Wigan.
I'm happy to make that request on behalf of Councillor Sanford.
Okay, perfect. Fiona, shall I request now? Did you want me to request, or do you want...
You need to decide whether all the rest of the discussion is finished, that you have in public session first.
Perfect. Do we have any other questions on the other material? And then we'll discuss that part at the end. Anybody got any further questions? No, we don't take... apologies, we don't take questions from public.
Chair, you might want to consider whether the committee wish to make any recommendations in this session before you go into closed session.
Okay, so do we not do that at the end altogether?
The problem is that if you exclude the public, you exclude the public. So.
Yeah. Okay, yeah, thank you.
Sorry, Pauline, do you want to...
Yeah.
Sorry, yes. If the committee decide to go into exempt session, members of the public and press, if they're here, would have to leave. I mean, they could obviously wait in the reception area, but could not be party to any discussion here. We would then, once the exempt session is finished, we would then have to come back into public session to make any recommendations. Then, if the members of the public were still around, they could come back into the building, into the meeting to hear the outcome. But discussion on the exempt annex, unfortunately, would not allow members of the public to be here.
So we have two options, either to go for recommendations now, and then do we go for recommendations now?
You may. I don't see any reason why you can't do that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Councillor Sharp.
Would we have the opportunity to change our opinion on any recommendations based on later evidence, though?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So in that case, we invite the public to go into the reception area, and then come back after we finish discussing that element, and then we do the recommendation. Is that correct?
Okay, so I think the first thing is, Chair, to ask the committee if they're in agreement for going into exempt session now to discuss that appendix.
Okay. Are we in agreement, members, to go in discussion for the exempt session? Agreed. Okay.
Then I would have to ask, obviously, Councillor Sanford and Councillor Fox to also leave, because obviously you're not part of the committee, and members of the public, if you would be kind enough to leave the meeting room, please.
Can the legal officer confirm that? Because that's not my understanding of what the Constitution says.
I'm just looking up the access to information rules at the moment. Let me have 1 minute to look it up, please.
Thank you. So, conferring with the Constitution, really, it'd probably be at the Chair's discretion to allow other members, councillors, to stay. So, Councillor Farouk has said Councillor Sanford and Councillor Fox could continue to stay in the exempt session. So, I will speak to the technician and cut the live stream just for now, which will pause. And if members of the public could leave and wait in the reception area, please, and then we can invite you back into the meeting once it's finished. Thank you.
You can stay. You want to go?